I was teaching a course pretty close to this hour a number of years ago, and I had a habit at that time. Does anyone in here remember blackboards and chalk? All right. Back when there were blackboards and chalk, I would arrive at my class maybe 10 minutes early, and I would outline my lecture on the first panel, and then as the lecture unfolded, I would check off. I did that for two reasons. One, so that I would stay on track, but secondly, so that my students would have a more coherent set of notes. There was one guy who came at the same time I did. He would arrive about 10 minutes early also, and he sat on the front row. And while I was putting my notes on the board, he'd put his arm down on his desk and go to sleep. And he would sleep through the entire class. And then when the class would come to an end, he'd rouse himself and head out the door. And after that happened 3 or 4 times, I kind of screwed up my courage, and I went over and I said, "Look, son, it's obvious that you need sleep. Why don't you just stay in your dorm room or in your apartment, catch up on your sleep, and we'll catch up on this economics later." He says, "But Professor Yandle, I can sleep so much better when you're talking." And so I'm going to be watching you closely. But he slept through that entire semester and earned a solid F. And that is an unusual thing. As you know, in higher education, you get a lot of warnings before you earn an F. Drop while passing, all kinds of things take place. But he sat there and earned a solid F. About a year or so later, he showed up again in my class and apparently had caught up on his sleep, and we had a different story and a different outcome. With all that is going on in the world, let's take a look at the economic situation and see if we can identify some major forces that are playing through our economy. Talk about that some, and maybe if we have time, talk a little bit about bootleggers and Baptists and how they are interacting in the regulatory process, and in the process having great influence on political outcomes. But will be a theme. What we're looking for in this conversation, we're looking for 3-lane wealth creation on a 2-lane road. Now, everybody in here has experienced this, maybe more often than you would like. After all, well, 1 lane of Connecticut Avenue is closed right now. But all of us have experienced the situation of going down an interstate and suddenly you see a sign that says 500 yards, right lane closes. And then the white and orange barrels start showing up, and here you are in a traffic jam. How many of you have experienced this and traffic literally stops totally, and it stopped, and it stopped? We've all experienced that. How many of you have seen the warning light come on your gas gauge while you're sitting there not moving? Anybody ever had that experience? All right. Do you remember the knot that you get in your stomach? And you wonder, am I going to run out of gas sitting here on the interstate? Is there anyone in the room who has ever run out of gas in this situation? Well, I'm glad. But if you ever ran out of gas, I hope that there was someone nearby who would be a good Samaritan, who would come and knock on your window and maybe say, "I've got a Georgia credit card." That's a siphon, in case you have not heard that expression. "I've got a Georgia credit card and I will use it to get a little bit of gas out, and I'm going to get you going." And so sure enough, there you are, you gave out of gas and now you're being helped out along the way. And if that ever happened to you, most likely you said, "Look, friend, as soon as we get moving and we get to an exit, I want you to follow me off and I'm going to fill up your tank." And if you're staying with the story, if that ever happened, I hope that you did not get to a point where you pulled off and there was a sign on the gas tank that said, "No gas." Now, if you've stayed with me, what I'm describing to you is the operation of the U.S. economy. In normal times, whatever that means, but let's just say if we look at the data and we average it, the U.S. economy is generating 3.14% annual real GDP growth sort of over a long period of time, 3.14. Right now we're generating 2. So if we sort of round these numbers, we have an economy, an engine that is capable of generating 3% growth, 3 lanes. It's generating 2% growth, 2 lanes. 1 lane is closed. Why? What is it going to take to get that 3rd lane open? And so as we talk about it, in other words, what's holding us back? Some reasons for optimism, fortunately, and yet some complicating factors. We'll stop right after that and talk a little bit, see if there are questions, and then, if we have the time, we'll spend a little bit of time visiting with some bootleggers and Baptists. What you're looking at here is real GDP growth. Notice that this chart ends in the second quarter of 2014 with the second estimate. That's that last bar down there. That's the second estimate. I'll show you the third in a minute. But if you stare at this, the white line is a 4-quarter moving average. So you can put your finger at any point on the white line, and when you look at the white line, you're seeing what the annual growth rate is at that point. So if you look over at the white line, you'll see that it's just barely touching 2% based on that second estimate. Now, the Commerce Department turns out 3 estimates for GDP growth every quarter. The third one is going to be better than what we're looking at here. The distance between the white line and the red line is what we're talking about, the lane that is closed. Now, let's freshen this a little bit. Now I'm showing you the final estimate. If we go back, that one, that last bar, was at 4.2% real GDP growth for the second quarter. Final estimate, 4.6%. Came in with some strength, primarily on the basis of improved export sales, but I would say, unfortunately, maybe, on the basis of accumulated inventories. In other words, if you get a surge in GDP growth that is based on merchants and manufacturers and retailers buying inventory, that's not final sales. That's a buildup in hope of final sales. If they have overdone it, then in the next quarter, there will be a reduction. Now, if you think about that for a moment in terms of this data, it's 4.6. 1.67 percentage points of that 4.6 is inventory buildup. It's highly likely that the third quarter will come in at a paler level than 4.6, but it could well be 3. There's our third lane. And so there's our picture right now. And there's the gap. And right now the white line is at about 2.2. And my mother loved me a lot when I was little, and so I'm optimistic, and I say, yeah, and it's kind of pointing north like it wants to go up. All right. That remains to be seen as to whether it goes up. Now, to put this on a per capita basis, in other words, GDP growth is just the big number. And that number can get bigger if you have a larger population. But that doesn't mean that the average person is better off just because real GDP goes up. It might be say, hey, it's because we got a whole lot more people and they're working. But on average, they're poorer while our GDP goes up. Now let's put it on a per capita basis. And what I'm showing you here is per capita real disposable income. Now I'm showing you an arrow there for the first quarter. First quarter, real, average per capita, disposable income, growth rate is negative. Negative. Negative 2%. In that second quarter, we had such severe weather conditions nationwide that it sort of knocked the economy in the head. Lots of icy expressways, lots of shutdowns, truly severe, and particularly on construction. It was so severe that on average, the United States population was getting poorer. On average, real per capita GDP, our disposable income, was falling. Now, then here comes the improvement. We're bouncing back, and you can see that with this second quarter and its revision. And so, okay, this is feeling better now for the average person. Now I'm showing you some recent forecasts for the year we're in as well as for the year to come for a number of organizations with a good bit of credibility for each one. And, I'm showing us a jack-o'-lantern there which says, hey, boo, I'm not real sure about these numbers, but let's look at them. Notice the conference board says this year we will have 1.5. And right now we're at 2.2. That suggests they're pessimistic about the last 2 quarters of the year. And then you can see what they're expecting for the year ahead, 2.9, getting close to the 3-lane system. And let your eyes run down and you see the Congressional Budget Office just released their revised pessimistic growth estimate for this year, but with a good bit of optimism for the year ahead. And the most optimistic estimate of all is coming out of the White House. There may be some rose-colored glasses there, but here we have a range of numbers which gives you some idea of what is going on. Now that bottom range, that bottom estimate, the Livingston survey, is taken by the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank, and that's an estimate of 30 economists. They poll every quarter, and so you might say if you pool enough ignorance and average it out, this is what you get. Somebody in that 30 is right. But that gives you an idea of the range of expectations. The point of this is that in the year ahead, 2015, there's a consensus that says third lane is going to open. Third lane wealth creation is on the way, and we're seeing some reasons to be optimistic about that. And here's what I'm expecting. This is on a quarterly basis as we look at the numbers between now and 2017, breaking through the 3. But notice I'm expecting a recession to come along about 2018. And you could say, well, what's the basis for expecting a recession in 2018? The first reason that you might expect a recession is that since World War II, we've had a recession every 54 months, on average. And we're long overdue right now. Now, expanding economies don't die of old age. That is, why do we get recessions? They die because of hatchet murders, when the Federal Reserve kills them. It's always the Fed that has the unfortunate heavy responsibility to slow down the economy when it appears to be running too fast. And so my expectation is that between now and 2018, the economy will get back up on its legs. We'll start trotting along at better than 3%. We will begin to see some inflation, and the Fed will do what it always does, get nervous and say, we better slow this thing down, hit the brakes, and we'll get a recession in 2018, 2019 that I expect will be a mild recession, nothing like what we have just escaped. Now there's a lot of excess capacity in the world economy, which is perhaps one of the reasons why this growth period we are in now is an extended one, more than 54 months. We go back to date this to June of 2008. That's when the previous recession ended, and now we have been climbing back since then, since June of 2008. But as you know, climbing back at a very slow pace. So we have a complicated economy, but here are prospects to think about as we look ahead to see what might happen. And so what's holding us back? What's keeping the third lane closed? And is there anything that anybody can do about it other than cross fingers and hope for something better? First, we are a highly regulated economy with huge amounts of regulation in the pipeline yet to emerge. A huge amount of regulation is on the way. If you take a look at Dodd-Frank, for example, one of the most extensive pieces of legislation in our modern history with respect to regulation, only about half of the regulations embedded in that statute have made it through the pipeline. Dodd-Frank, in effect, turns the entire banking system into a system of like regulated public utilities. The large banks now are about like the producers and sellers of electricity across the United States, which have a regulatory commission that tells them what their prices will be, that tells them when they are able to expand or contract, that tells them when they are able to change the financial composition of their balance sheet, that tells them what the executives may be paid if they think they're paid too much, on and on. Only in the case of the banks, we don't have a regulatory commission as such. We've got lots of regulators that are there. Then there is a host of regulation that is environmental in terms of its label that is in the works. The most onerous, by that I mean the most costly, has to do with regulations affecting the consumption of coal, primarily in the production of electricity. That's on the way. Now, to what extent have these rules and regulations, if we look there at Gulliver and all the Lilliputians, every regulation is a constraint. That's what the word means. I'm going to regulate you. Every regulation is a constraint. Since 1983, there have been 2 million pages published in the Federal Register. To give you an idea, 2 million new pages of rules since 1983. Every one of those pages, by and large, not each and every one, because some of those rules may be 50 or 60 pages long, but each one is a package of constraints, regulation. Now, each one is probably pretty small. Relative to our entire economy, we've got this gigantic economy, but cumulatively, they begin to be binding to Gulliver. Now, to what extent is that the case? Well, a couple of economists at George Mason University about 4 years ago now began a project called Reg Data. If anybody in here is really into this topic, it's on the web. And what they did was to set up a search engine for the entire Code of Federal Regulation. Anybody here familiar with the Code of Federal Regulations? If you were to put it on the floor and stack it, it would go above the ceiling. They took the entire Code of Federal Regulation, developed a search engine, and they counted the frequency of the words that you see there under the image for each regulatory area, like environment, and for each industry in the United States. Now, these are command and control words. Those are constraining words. And so they've counted them. And now they have an index so that we can look to see which industries have been most affected and how does it compare and what does it look like over time. The blue line I'm showing you in this chart is the average for all industries in America. We go back to the origin of 1997. That's when they began their count. And so relative to 1997, the frequency of those words is now 20% higher for all industries in America. You get the picture. I'm showing you the textile industry. Now, the textile industry is the largest employer of labor in the United States, textiles and apparel. And it is one of the most constrained industries. See, 35% growth for that industry in terms of regulation. Now I'm going to show you a few others. I'm showing you paper manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, oil and gas extraction. All of those lie above the average. And I'm merely showing you this to identify what could be a constraint that is holding us back. It is not necessarily saying that those regulations should never have been written. This is not an evaluation of the regulation. Did they produce benefits? Of course. No rule would ever be written that produces no benefits. Every one of them produced a benefit for somebody or for some group. Each one of them produced cost, and in some cases the costs are less than the benefits, and we could say, hey, that's great. In other cases, the costs are greater than the benefits, and you might say, well, that's too bad. But there are always constraints that are affecting our ability to produce. Now, that's one thing that's holding us back, and it will continue to hold us back It may continue to make us feel healthier, to make highways safer, to make cars more fuel efficient, on and on. But each one is a constraint. Now this is something else. There are 2 economists at the University of Chicago and 2 at Stanford University, and probably 100 of their graduate student slaves who work diligently to maintain an index of economic uncertainty. The index is made up of 3 component parts. They read 50 daily newspapers every day, and they flag the occurrence of policy change, uncertainty. Then they follow the tax code, changes in the tax code. Any expirations in the existing tax code, if there's an expiration, that means the law will be changed. The code will be changed. Anytime the code is to be changed, what's it going to be? That's uncertainty. And then they look at these economists' forecasts of GDP growth, and they look at the variance or the standard deviation in those numbers. The larger the variation, the greater the uncertainty. And so there's their index. Now I'm showing you data that goes back to January of 2000. And as you look at this, you can see some peaks and valleys. Now I'm going to label them for you. Now you can see what may have caused those peaks and valleys. Let's look at the most recent part. Debt ceiling debate. Well, there was a headline in yesterday's Washington Post that says, hey, there's some discussion on the Hill that there may now be yet one more showdown about raising the debt ceiling, which is the counterpart of saying you pulled off the expressway and you were going to buy gas for somebody, but there was no gas. And so now you're still in debt. Raising the debt ceiling enables us to buy gas on credit. 44 cents out of every dollar we spend in Washington is borrowed on a credit card. And we've got the platinum credit card in this world. We got the best one going. If it ever turns into a debit card, are we in trouble? There's no chance that it's going to turn into a debit card based on evidence and things that we see out there. As a matter of fact, our credit card is getting stronger, not weaker, because of what is going on in the rest of the world. All right, now back to this. As you look across this, you see when Lehman Brothers went down. If you start at the very beginning back there, that was the George W. Bush election question that went to the Supreme Court to determine who won. Great uncertainty. And you can see what has happened. Now, what's the encouraging thing? The encouraging thing is that that yellow line is headed south. Headed south means lower economic policy uncertainty. Now, what I've done here is to map the U.S. unemployment rate into the Economic Policy Uncertainty Index. And hey, you get sort of a satisfying relationship here. This says that when the Economic Uncertainty Policy Index goes down, more certainty, it suggests that people screw up their courage and they say, wow, I'm going to hire some more full-time workers instead of part-timers or instead of temporaries. And as the uncertainty goes down further, I'm going to add a shift of workers so that we get this nice, neat relationship between the unemployment rate in our economy and uncertainty. Uncertainty is headed down. That's the good news. The unemployment rate, the most recent one, is 5.9%, the lowest since 2008. It's going down. The unemployment rate, as we all know, can go down just because a bunch of people decide they're going to stop looking for work. But it has gone down without a huge increase in that other part. So be encouraged. Things are getting better. Now here's some other reasons for optimism. What I'm showing you here is the consumption of energy by our economy. I've put a circle there. That's the big, deep recession that ended in 2008. That's the Great Recession. Energy consumption falls. As the economy sort of goes to sleep, it wakes back up. We see consumption increasing. Now I'm showing you a ray through a set of recent observations, and that is growing at a 7% annual rate. So we've got an economy using up energy, producing benefits, producing stuff, reasons for optimism. Now, an index that is one of my favorite is my pickup truck index. When pickup truck sales pick up, increase, it means, generally speaking, that America is going back to work. If you really want to keep your finger on the pulse beat of the economy, pick out one of these giant filling stations like QT or something like that. One of those that has about 20 bays, and they sell everything in the world back there. You could probably get a heart transplant if you were willing to wait a little bit. All kinds of things are for sale, but they sell a lot of gas. The gas is usually less expensive than at other stations. If you want to get a reading on the economy, get up about 6 o'clock in the morning and go down, get a cup of coffee, and watch to see if there are many pickup trucks coming in and filling up. Those pickup trucks that are filling up are carpenters, heating and air conditioning people, people who hang drywall, roofers, telephone people, people who work for the gas company. They are people who are helping to build. They're back. Now, I'm showing you passenger car shipments. There's light pickup truck shipments. And notice that's through March. I'm showing you a Ford F-150 pickup truck primarily because that is the most popular vehicle sold in America, trucks and cars considered. That's number one, has been for decades. And now I'm going to update the chart for you. Notice that's for March. This is through June. Now, call your attention to the fact that passenger car sales are picking up and light truck sales are picking up. Two reasons for optimism as you think about the economy going forward. Now, another reason for optimism, if you go back and think about the unemployed in our economy, and I'll show you something in a minute to elaborate on this, a large part of the unemployed part of our economy is made up of people who do not have a high school education. That's the tough part. They do not have a high school diploma. Now, if you go back and see the people in the pickup trucks who are carpenters and plumbers and roofers, drywall hangers, if you were to go and talk to the people in the pickup trucks, and if you could ask, did you graduate from high school? Well, of course, you're not going to ask that. But if you did, you would find that a lot of folks that drive those pickup trucks that do the work of our economy do not have a high school diploma. They may have a community college certificate of some kind. They seldom have a bachelor's degree. And I'll guarantee you, you won't find anybody with a PhD unless you're looking for somebody who's really happy that they have been able to escape the harm that was done to them by their education. Now, what I'm showing you here, back to the main line, this is lending activity for all of the commercial banks in the United States taken together. There's a category of loans called commercial and industrial lending. Call that business lending. Then there's a category called mortgage lending. The yellow line is commercial and industrial. When you look at it, you see that it's headed north. Lending is picking up. And if you look at the white line, that's mortgage lending. It's just beginning to turn up again. Just beginning to turn up. As it turns up, the third lane begins to open a little more as that white line turns up. But now, for the first time in quite a while, it is headed in the right direction. But now, all this economic data may be one thing, but there is a measure of prospects for our economy that's been around a long time with some credibility associated with it. And this has to do with the length of hemlines of women's dresses. And what you're seeing here is data that goes back to 1917, coming forward, where someone has mapped the movement of the composite measure of the stock exchange and its level with the length of women's hemlines. The relationship is sort of ironclad. The shorter the dresses, the better. the markets perform. When the dresses get long, the market goes down. Or when the market goes down, the dresses get long. Who knows which? But let's fashion this a little bit. In the 1980s, I was living here in Washington at the time. During the Reagan years, we had the most serious recession that we had had in the United States since the Great Depression. The employment effects of the recession of 1982-83 were more serious than the Great Recession, if you can believe that. That's what some of the hemlines looked like back in that period. Then as we move forward, there's 2008. Picking up a little bit, people were saying we've got a picky-boo recovery coming. You can see what the dresses looked like in the 1990s, and of course there were dresses of different lengths. But the one there in the middle really tickled me when I saw this. This was about 6 weeks ago when the fashion gurus in New York were announcing what might be the fashion for the current period. There it was, and when I saw that, I thought, gee whiz, 4% real GDP growth is on the way. Now this is real. These aren't economists' numbers. This is human behavior. But as always, there are some complicating factors. Wouldn't you know? And one big complicating factor is that we have lost, we don't know where they are, 8.3 million workers. 8.3 million Waldos, in a sense, are unaccounted for in the economy. They are no longer working. Now we're comparing with 2007. 8.3 million have disappeared in the sense they're no longer employed and they're no longer looking for work. All right, got it? Not only are they not working, they're not looking. In other words, they are not participating in the economy, the formal economy, as we normally follow it. 8.3 million. Now that we could pause for a minute and say, well, no economy, like the size of ours, can get a full third lane operating with 8.3 million people standing over on the side of the road waving as the cars go by. And so this is a truly complicating factor. Trying to find out where these 8.3 million people might be is probably a detective challenge worth trying. I have tried to identify, and it looked like to me I found 2 million of them. They're in college. We had a surge of enrollment in technical and community colleges, a surge of enrollment in universities. When people can't find work, a lot of times they say, well, this is the time to get retooled. So 2 million are out there in school. As things pick up, they'll be back out with better equipment to participate in the economy. Close to 2 million, there was a spike in the enrollment in Social Security disability programs. The rules were changed to make it easier, trying to help people who were in trouble with the Great Recession. Now, if you get on the Social Security disability program, which is targeted to go bankrupt in 2020, you have $15,000 annual income for life and Medicare for life. And some people take that, put it with some other things that they do, and the next thing you know, they're not looking for work. If they get a job, what do they lose? They lose the Medicare and they lose their disability payments, all of them. It's a 0-1 game. And so that's another part. Some took early retirement, and so they're there. But in any case, we've got a big number. It's a complicating factor. Now let me elaborate on this a little bit. What I'm showing you here is data for August. I'm showing you the labor participation rate on the basis of educational attainment, and I'm showing you the unemployment rate on the basis of educational attainment. And now we're back to the pickup trucks. If you'll look at that green slice of pie, notice that the unemployment rate, this is for adults, people over 25, the unemployment rate for that group without high school diplomas is 9.1%. If you want to make a quick comparison, look at the red slice. That's for people over 25 with a bachelor's degree, 3.2. We almost are at a crisis in terms of the availability of people with experience and a bachelor's degree. But back to the tough case. 45%, only 45% of that group, only 45% is participating in the economy. 55% not employed and not looking. That's back to the 8.3 million. That's our big challenge. A piece of that has to do with those who are in construction. And that is why we would be more optimistic if bank lending picked up for mortgages and construction activity. That would dip into that green slice. Now, it may not be quite as bad as those numbers suggest in terms of stuff that's being produced in services as well as incomes for people. We have a burgeoning underground economy, illegal economy, cash economy. Anytime there's a recession, the underground economy expands. The underground economy, you can bump into it if you decide you want to get a tree cut on your property. You can look up in the listings of people who are in the business of cutting down trees and hauling off wood. There's a good chance that if you get someone and they come in their pickup truck with their chainsaw and you say, well, how much are you going to charge me? And they'll say, well, if you pay me cash, here's the number. If you pay me with a check, here's the number. Pay me with a check is a bigger number. You just met someone who is operating in the illegal economy. That's the underground economy. The underground economy is tracked by economists by looking at the circulation of $100 bills per capita. It's a $100 bill economy. Now keep thinking about these 8.3 million that are out there somewhere. Now I'm showing you the total circulation by denomination in the U.S. economy. And as you look at that data, you can see what has happened to the slope of the line that shows you the growth of circulation of currency, particularly $100 bills, in our economy in association with the Great Recession, which ended back there in 2008. And so now when somebody says there are a lot of people who are out there suffering, they are certainly right. But there are also a lot of people out there who are not suffering far as much as some people might think. And now let's go back to the QT filling station. If you see one of these guys in a beautiful F-150 white pickup truck hauling on a trailer a $6,000 zero radius turn lawnmower with a lot of weed eaters and a lot of tools on the back of the truck, you may be looking at someone who is filling out tax returns every quarter on every dollar that they earn, or you may be looking at someone who is operating in the cash underground economy. And they may be somebody who is drawing disability, Social Security payments, and other things that were designed to help people who were hurt by that Great Recession. And so there is something else going on. Now what I'm showing you here is the U.S. labor participation rate. Notice how it's fallen. In fact, this is just through 2013. The number that we got last week was 62.3%, the lowest yet. That's the participation rate of the adult labor force in the economy. 62% are participating. And this is what you get when you map that number into the circulation of bills in the U.S. From 2000 to 2013, there is a very, very tight relationship. More circulating bills, lower participation rate. Let's reverse that. Lower participation rate, more circulation of $100 bills, a larger cash economy. Now this cash economy, the size of it has been estimated by a couple of economists recently. They estimate that there's $2 trillion of economic activity out there in the underground economy, not paying any taxes. If the taxes were paid on that economy, it would be $500 billion annually. Now I ask you to guess, and you may know if you follow these kinds of things, guess the size of the U.S. operating deficit. $500 billion. Now that's just a coincidence. The deficit is coming down. It's right at about $500 billion. We've got an underground economy that if it were paying taxes would be paying $500 billion. And of course, there's no way to make those two things smile and shake hands with each other, but it does give us a dimension of the problem. Another fascinating issue about our economy, and it is not so much complicating in the sense that it keeps us from moving forward, but it's complicating about how we're moving forward, and it is what is called the sharing economy. A big debate here in D.C. has to do with the taxi cabs and Uber. And now maybe the Taxi Cab Commission will develop its own software so that we consumers up here can use our smartphones to summon a cab, to pay for the cab with our smartphones, all the things that are done with smartphones. There's the Discover Room. If you are stranded in Chicago when the FAA is put out of business because of a flood in the basement and everybody is wondering where on earth are we going to spend the night, and all the hotels you check are sold out, you can go to your software and go to Discover Room, and you will find some rooms available, maybe in someone's home, who knows where they are. All of these things that are taking place, and this is just scratching the surface, are leading to a higher utilization of assets that we already have operating. To the extent that Uber is working and more automobiles are being used, using their excess capacity for moving people, that means we will need fewer cabs and limousines until things catch up. To the extent that Discover Room takes the place of a room at the Marriott or the Days Inn, that's one less that gets built. And so, with smartphone technology, we have increasing utilization of assets. That will slow down the production of those assets while using what we have more effectively, which then translates into lower GDP growth, depending on the reporting, while we are better off because of the sharing economy. And so we're in that kind of process right now. It's a complicating factor. Here's the geographic imprint. This is real state GDP growth. The most recent data comes through 2013. You want to be dark blue. And if you really want to find the dark blue territory, move to one of those wonderful square states right at the fold of the map. That's where it's hot. Well, it's cold in the winter, but it's hot as far as the economy is concerned. And then let your eyes run down the middle of our country, and that's where GDP growth is highest. It is also where educational attainment is highest. There's the strength of our economy. If you look to the right of the Mississippi River, you're looking at the old industrial manufacturing economy, which still has weaknesses in it. But that's the picture of GDP growth. In a sense, it's reflected in the unemployment rate by state. The lighter the color here, the happier you will be as far as job opportunities are concerned. Let me stop here and see if I've touched on something that raises a question, and be happy to do my best to discuss any question or issue that may have been triggered in your mind as I have chatted away. Anybody have a question? Yes, sir.